Hey guys, tonight we are drifting back, not to a battlefield or a royal court, but to a quiet, sun-drenched hillside in the ancient highlands of Ethiopia. This is where our story begins, not with a bang, but with a bleat. You are standing on a rocky slope, the air thin and cool, smelling of dust and wild rosemary. In the distance, the legendary highland peaks are hazy purple giants against an impossibly blue sky. This is Kaffa, a region whose name will one day travel the world, though its original product will be forever mispronounced. Your feet are bare, the earth warm and gritty beneath them. You are a young goatherd named Kaldi, and your entire world is the herd of restless, nimble-footed goats you're responsible for. They are your livelihood, your constant companions, and today, they are about to become your guides to a discovery that will, centuries later, fuel late-night study sessions, power corporate empires, and become the entire reason a functioning printer exists in an office. Your day is monotonous, defined by the slow arc of the sun and the whims of your capricious charges. You trudge after them, your staff tapping against stones, your voice occasionally calling out to a stray. The silence is immense, broken only by the wind, the bleating of the goats, and the distant cry of a bird. It's a peaceful existence, but a lonely one. Your mind wanders. You probably wouldn't survive a single day in the caffeinated, high-speed world. This very hillside will help create a world of honking cars, blinking notifications, and the constant, low-grade anxiety of being late for something. Here, time is measured in seasons, not seconds, but today, the slow, ancient rhythm of this place is about to be irrevocably interrupted. You notice the goats are acting strangely. They've wandered into a grove of small, evergreen bushes you've passed 1,000 times before, never giving them a second thought. But now, the herd is clustered around them, not just browsing, but fervently, almost frantically, stripping the branches of their bright red berries. It's odd behavior, but not alarming. Yet, you settle down against a rock to wait for them to finish, the warmth of the stone seeping into your back. You doze, a sound jolts you awake. It's not a normal goat sound, it's it prancing. You open your eyes and blink against the sun. The scene before you is one of utter, bizarre chaos. Your normally placid herd is in the midst of what can only be described as a raucous, four-legged festival. They are dancing. They are bleating excitedly, chasing their tails, and butting heads with a playful energy you've never witnessed. They are, for lack of a better word, vibrating. One particularly enthusiastic buck is standing on his hind legs, performing a shaky, ungainly jig before tumbling over and immediately getting up to do it again. Your first thought is panic. Have they eaten something poisonous? Has a dessert spirit cursed them? But they don't look sick. They look exhilarated. They are the picture of vibrant, uncontrollable life. This right here is the cornerstone of the story, the mainstream historical fact. Wrapped in the gauze of legend, the discovery of coffee as stimulating properties is attributed to an Ethiopian goat herder named Kaldi in the 9th century, observing the energizing effect the cherries had on his flock. It's a perfect origin myth, a tale that neatly packages a world-changing discovery in a simple, relatable anecdote. It's the kind of story that feels true, even if the exact historical details are, well, fuzzy. And here's your first quirky, fringe tidbit. Some lesser-known regional variations of the legend don't feature Kaldi at all. Instead, they tell of a Sufi mystic who was traveling through the region and observed the hyperactive goats. Being a holy man versed in the properties of plants, he immediately understood the berries were a divine gift to help him and his brothers stay awake during their long, nighttime devotions. In this version, the goats were merely the divinely appointed delivery system. It's a fascinating alternative that cuts out the middleman and goes straight to the mystical significance. Historians still argue whether Kaldi was a real person or simply a convenient folkloric figure, created to personify the discovery. There are no contemporary records of him, no carvings on a cave wall saying Kaldi was here, and his goats are nuts. The earliest written account of the Kaldi story doesn't appear until 1671, hundreds of years after the fact, in a book by a Roman academic. It is entirely possible that the energizing effects of the coffee cherry were discovered and utilized by local communities over generations, and the Kaldi myth was a later, more colorful packaging of that collective knowledge. The truth is likely lost to the Ethiopian winds, but the story remains too good not to be true. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere in the world right now, maybe with a cup of coffee on your nightstand, I'd love to hear where you are and what time it is for you. Post your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see just how far across the globe this little community stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Back on that hillside, you, Kaldi, are now filled with a curiosity that outweighs your confusion. You approach the bush, your dancing goats parting around you. You reach out and pluck one of the ripe, crimson cherries. It's firm and cool between your fingers. You pop it into your mouth and bite down. The initial taste is surprisingly sweet, the fruit pulpy and pleasant. Then your teeth hit the hard, twin seeds within. They're too tough to chew, so you spit them into your hand, along with the mashed fruit. You stare at the seeds, now slick and gleaming. What power do they hold? Could they do for you what they did for your goats? Feeling a boldness born of isolation and wonder, you decide to find out. You gather a handful of the cherries, stuffing them into the small leather pouch at your waist. As the sun begins to dip below the hills, turning the sky to fire, you lead your still energetic herd home, your mind racing with a new, electric kind of thought. You have no idea that tucked against your hip is the key to a future you cannot possibly imagine. A future of whispered conversations in smoky rooms, of revolutions plotted on marble tables, of a world waiting to be woken up. The journey home feels different. The path is the same. The goats are the same, though still unusually sprightly, leaping onto rocks that normally just amble past, but your mind is alight. The hard seeds in your pouch feel heavier than they are, a tangible weight of mystery. You arrive at your simple dwelling as the stars begin to pepper the vast Ethiopian sky, a ceiling of diamonds so clear and close you feel you could almost reach up and disturb them. Your family notices your preoccupied silence, the way you keep touching the pouch at your side. After the evening meal, you finally confess, spilling the strange red berries and the story of your dancing goats onto the rough-hewn table. The reaction is a mixture of curiosity and deep suspicion. An elder warns you of jinn, spirits that can inhabit plants and trick men. The berries are discarded, deemed potentially dangerous, and you are told to steer your herd away from that grove. But the seed of curiosity, much like the beans themselves, has been planted in the fertile soil of your mind, and it refuses to be uprooted. Frustrated but unable to let it go, you decide your next course of action isn't to consult your village, but to take your discovery higher. Quite literally, you've heard tales of holy men living in austere communities in the distant mountains, men who seek wisdom and communion with the divine through solitude and prayer. If anyone can understand the nature of this mysterious plant, it would be them. So, you fill your pouch with the bright red cherries, take a provision sack, and begin the long, arduous trek into the highlands. You walk for days, the air growing thinner, the landscape more rugged and breathtaking. Finally, you see it, a simple monastery carved into the face of a cliff, a place of silence and stone. You are greeted with wary hospitality by a monk named Khalid. His eyes are kind but tired, etched with the fatigue of long vigils. You tell him your story, showing him the cherries. He listens patiently, a small smile playing on his lips at the tale of the dancing goats. He thanks you, accepts the pouch, and you make the long journey home, wondering if you've just delivered a curse or a gift to men of God. Back at the monastery, the cherries are examined with a scholar's curiosity. The monks, devout Sufis dedicated to reaching a state of divine ecstasy through chanting, dancing, and long hours of prayer, are intrigued. They experiment. First, they try chewing the berries as you did. The effect is there a slight lift, a sharpening of the senses, but the effort is messy and the taste, while initially sweet, leaves a bitter aftertaste. Then, one monk, perhaps frustrated or simply innovative, tosses a handful of the discarded seeds into the fire, believing them useless. The air is suddenly filled with an aroma that makes them all stop mid-prayer. It's a rich, nutty, profoundly inviting smell, a scent that seems to warm the soul. They rake the seeds from the embers. They are now dark, brittle, and fragrant. Another monk, seized by inspiration, gathers these roasted beans, crushes them with a stone, and pours hot water over the coarse grounds. The water turns a deep, opaque black. They let it steep. The aroma is intoxicating. With a shared look of determination, they drink. The effect is not the frantic, playful energy of the goats. For these men seeking spiritual awakening, it is nothing short of a miracle. The thick, bitter brew acts as a key, unlocking a door in their minds they didn't know was closed. The weight of exhaustion that accompanies their nighttime devotions, the Deeker ceremonies where they repeat the names of God for hours until they enter a trance-like state, simply melts away. Their minds become clear, razor-sharp vessels for prayer. Their focus is absolute. They can chant through the night, their voices strong, their hearts open, their connection to the divine feeling more direct and vivid than ever before. They call this new brukawa, a word originally used for wine, but now repurposed to mean that which prevents sleep, to them. It is the wine of the spirit, a sacred substance that scourges drowsiness from the soul and allows them to stand vigilant in their worship. This is the mainstream historical fact. The earliest credible evidence of coffee consumption points to Sufi monastic communities in 15th century Yemen using it as a devotional aid to sustain their lengthy religious rituals. And here is your quirky tidbit. The preparation method wasn't an instant success. One persistent fringe legend from a different monastic order tells of a monk who, after drinking the brew, became so intensely focused and awake that he began to see intricate geometric patterns, the fundamental building blocks of creation swirling in the steam rising from his cup. He became obsessed with documenting these patterns, spending days without sleep, drawing feverishly on every available surface. His brothers, concerned for his sanity, eventually had to hide the coffee beans and force him to rest, fearing he had glimpsed too much of the divine and his mind was unraveling. It was an early, extreme case of caffeine-induced hyperfocus, mistaken for religious mania. Historians still argue whether the Sufis discovered the roasting process independently or learned it from earlier non-monastic communities in Ethiopia or Yemen who were already consuming coffee in various forms. The transition from chewing the cherry to roasting the bean is a monumental technological leap. Was it truly a happy accident in a monastic fire? Or were the monks the first to document a process that was already known in the secular world? The meticulous records kept by religious orders give their story primacy, but the oral traditions of Ethiopian farmers might hold a different, unrecorded truth. The line between divine inspiration and cultural assimilation is often blurred by time. The news of this wine of Islam did not stay within the monastery as stone walls. It began to trickle out with travelers and traders who sought shelter there. They would be offered this strange, invigorating black drink and experience its power firsthand. They would carry tales of it back to the bustling port cities of the Arabian Peninsula, like Mocha. The Sufis, initially guarding their secret, eventually became the unintentional distributors of the bean, trading it with merchants for other goods. The genie was out of the bottle, or rather, the bean was out of the pouch. What was once a sacred tool for connecting with the heavens was about to descend into the gritty, complicated, and wonderfully chaotic world of men. It was moving from the solitary stone cell to the crowded public square, and its transformation from a religious aid to a social lubricant would happen with astonishing speed, forever changing the rhythm of daily life. The journey of the bean from the silent, incense-heavy air of the monastery to the loud, dust-choked, and spice-scented chaos of a city like Mecca is a story of whispers and wonder. You are no longer a goatherd or a monk. You are a traveler, a merchant perhaps, or a pilgrim finally reaching the end of a long journey. You step through the massive gates of Mecca, a city pulsing with the energy of countless souls drawn to its holy center. The air is thick, a potent mixture of roasting meat, exotic perfumes, animal sweat, and the ever-present, fine dessert dust that coats everything. And now, something new, a new smell, dark and rich and entirely unfamiliar, cuts through the familiar cacophony of scents. It's the smell of coffee, and it's pouring from a dozen new, hastily constructed establishments tucked into the bustling souks, near the holy mosque itself. These are the first proto-coffee houses. They aren't the elegant cafés of Constantinople yet. They are simple benches, mats on the ground, a low fire with a pot always simmering. But their impact is immediate and electric. You enter one, drawn by the aroma and the sound of animated conversation. You pay a few coins and are handed a small, handleless ceramic cup filled with a liquid as black as night. You take a cautious sip. It's intensely bitter, a shock to your palate accustomed to sweet teas and water. But a moment later, a warmth spreads through you, a clarity descends upon your mind. The fatigue of your travels evaporates. You look around. The place is packed with a cross-section of the city. Pilgrims comparing routes, scholars debating fine points of law, merchants haggling over deals, and storytellers captivating circles of listeners. The buzz of conversation is unlike the drowsy murmur of a tea house, or the raucous shouting of a tavern. It's focused, energetic. Ideas seem to be flying through the air as tangibly as the steam from the cups. This is the mainstream historical fact. By the early 16th century, coffee had moved from Sufi circles into public life in Arabian cities like Mecca and Cairo, and its rapid popularity almost immediately triggered a violent cultural and religious backlash, leading to some of the first official bans on the drink and the spaces that served it. The conservative religious authorities watch this new phenomenon with deepening alarm. To them, this kawa is a dangerous innovation, an intoxicant that alters the mind, and its consumption in these crowded, mixed gatherings is a threat to public morality and social order. They see not lively debate, but sedition, not camaraderie, but idleness. The coffee house is a space outside their control, and the beverage itself, with its stimulant properties, is suspiciously akin to the forbidden wine. A powerful faction, led by the conservative governor of Mecca, Kher Beg, argues for its prohibition. In 1511, he takes action. He has the coffee sacks in the markets publicly burned. He sends his guards to raid the coffee gatherings, scattering patrons and smashing the pots. For a brief, confusing time, the aroma of coffee in Mecca is replaced by the smell of its beans burning on a pyre. The message is clear. This drink is haram, forbidden, and here is your corky, fringe tidbit from this era of prohibition. The bans created a thriving black market for coffee, run by a network of enterprising women. While the public coffee houses were dominated by men and, thus easily targeted by the authorities, women, operating from their homes, began to brew and sell coffee discreetly. They would use intricate signaling systems, a specific curtain drawn, a particular pot left on a windowsill to indicate to trusted clients that coffee was available. These clandestine operations, hidden in the private, female-dominated sphere of the home, were much harder for the governors, men to root out. For a time, the most reliable cup of coffee in Mecca wasn't found in a bustling shop, but was procured through a whispered conversation and a carefully timed visit to a seemingly ordinary home. Historians still argue whether the bans were motivated primarily by genuine religious concern or by political and economic anxiety. Was Kher Beg truly worried about the souls of his citizens, or was he more terrified of the free-flowing, uncensored conversations happening in these new spaces? Coffee houses were levelers. A lowly merchant could sit next to a respected scholar and argue. News and gossip spread there faster than any official censor could control. The threat may have been less about the drink itself and more about the new kind of social space. It created a public forum that operated outside the mosques and the courts. The debate was fierce and it reached the highest levels. The case was eventually appealed to the Sultan in Cairo, who, after consulting his own panel of scholars, overturned the ban. Their ruling was a landmark. They declared coffee permissible because, unlike wine, it did not cloud the mind but sharpened it. This theological victory paved the way for coffee's explosive spread. But the pattern was set. This danced the rise of the coffee house, the fear of the authorities, the ban, the debate, and the eventual, reluctant acceptance would repeat itself in every major city coffee would touch for the next 2 centuries. The coffee house was born in controversy, and a whiff of subversion would always cling to it. No matter how respectable it later became, the energy contained in those little beans was too powerful to be contained by either monastery or law. It was a social energy, and it was moving north, towards an empire that would embrace it, ritualize it, and turn its consumption into a high art form. The Ottoman court. The energy of the Arabian coffee house doesn't dissipate. It simply condenses, refines, and travels north with the camel caravans, following the trade routes into the heart of a burgeoning empire. The dust of Mecca and Cairo settles from your sandals as you find yourself in a world of opulent order and terrifying power. The court of Suleiman the Magnificent in Constantinople. The scale is staggering. Where the coffee stalls of Mecca were open and chaotic, everything here is measured, intentional, and hierarchical. The air, once thick with dessert dust, is now heavy with the scent of blooming roses and manicured gardens, of exquisite amber perfumes, and of 1,000 simmering dishes from the imperial kitchens. And now, that rich, dark aroma you first encountered in the souk is here too. But it has been transformed. It is no longer just the smell of a stimulant. It is the smell of ceremony, of power, of an entire culture adopting a foreign novelty and making it its own. You are not a merchant here. You are perhaps a minor diplomat, a visiting scholar, or simply an awed spectator in a vast, intricate machine. You witness the Ottoman embrace of coffee, and it is nothing less than alchemy. The simple act of brewing and drinking is elevated to a high art, a ritual as precise and meaningful as the court etiquette itself. This is where coffee is systematized. The beans are selected with the care of a jeweler choosing gems. They are roasted to a specific, consistent darkness, ground to a powder as fine as face powder, and then brewed in specially designed, long-handled pots called savas. The brewing itself is a performance. The careful heating, the precise moment the foam, the kaimak, begins to rise, the skillful pour that preserves this creamy crown in each individual cup. The result is not the thick, gritty brew of the Sufis or the straightforward black infusion of Mecca. It is a potent, thick, and silky concoction, often unsweetened to appreciate its complex, bitter character, and served in delicate porcelain cups nestled in ornate silver zarf holders to protect the fingers from the heat. At the very center of this ritual is a new kind of figure, the Kaveci Usta, the chief coffee maker. This is no simple servant. This is a highly trusted, immensely powerful court official. His role is the mainstream historical fact of this section. In the Ottoman court, the preparation and serving of coffee became an elaborate ceremony, and the Kaveci Usta was a revered figure responsible for this vital duty, often acting as a confidant taster and even a spy for the Sultan. His proximity to the ruler was absolute. He was the last line of defense against poison, a constant fear in the labyrinthine politics of the palace. He was privy to the Sultan's moods, his private conversations, his unguarded moments. The Kaveci Usta held a power that many viziers would have envied, all stemming from his mastery over the humble bean. And here is your quirky tidbit from the heart of the seraglio. The position of coffee taster was so fraught with danger that it spawned a host of bizarre superstitions and rituals. It's said that some Kaveci Ustas, before sipping from the Sultan's own cup, would perform a small, almost imperceptible ritual touching the rim of the cup to a specific blue bead, sewn into their garment, a common Turkish talisman against the evil eye, or whispering a quick, silent prayer under their breath. There was a fringe belief never written down, but passed in whispers through the palace kitchens, that a perfectly prepared coffee could not be poisoned. The complex chemistry of the brew would somehow curdle or change color if a foreign substance was introduced. This was likely nonsense, a comforting myth for men whose job was a daily dance with death, but it speaks to the almost mystical faith they placed in the beverage itself. Historians still argue whether the elaborate Ottoman coffee ritual was primarily about refinement and status, or if it was a deliberate act of control, by taking a drink associated with Sufi mystics and Arab street vendors and turning it into a complex, codified court ceremony. Was the sublime port effectively domesticating it? Were they stripping coffee of its rebellious, egalitarian associations and repackaging it as a symbol of Ottoman sophistication and imperial power? The debate hinges on intent. Was it a genuine appreciation of the drink's qualities, or a calculated political move to neuter a potential tool of social dissent by making its most refined form a symbol of the very establishment it might have threatened? The truth likely lies somewhere in the middle, a blend of genuine cultural adoption and shrewd political co-option. This new, Ottoman-style coffee doesn't stay locked behind palace walls for long. The court sets the trend. Soon, every wealthy household in Constantinople must have its own Kaveci Usta. The drinking of coffee becomes a mark of sophistication, of worldliness, of status. The demand for the beans skyrockets. The port of Mocha in Yemen becomes a nexus of global trade, its name forever synonymous with the bean it exports. Ottoman ships laden with gold and goods sail south, returning with holds packed with coffee, a treasure more valuable than spice. The empire doesn't just consume coffee, it incorporates it, and in doing so, it begins to control its flow. The stage is now set for a monopoly. The Arabian Peninsula had the secret, but the Ottoman Empire had the power, the wealth, and the ruthless mercantile ambition to corner the market. They guarded this valuable resource jealously, ensuring the fertile beans never left their control. They exported the roasted product, but the live beans, the seeds that could spawn a rival industry in a foreign land, were a state secret. It was a lucrative, ironclad grip on the world's caffeine supply. But secrets, especially ones as small and as valuable as a coffee bean, have a way of escaping. And the man who would eventually break the Ottoman monopoly would not be a king or a conqueror, but a smuggler with a clever, desperate plan and a very, very steady hand. The Ottoman monopoly on coffee is not just a business strategy, it's a fortress, guarded by customs officials, naval patrols, and the sheer, sun-scorched geography of the Arabian Peninsula. The empire controls the source in Yemen and the distribution routes with an iron grip. They sell the roasted beans at a premium, but the live, fertile seeds, the keys to growing coffee anywhere else in the world, are treated like state secrets, more carefully protected than some military plans. Exporting them is a crime punishable by death. The ports, especially Mocha, are locked down. Every sack of coffee beans leaving on a ship is inspected, sifted through, ensuring no viable contraband seeds are hidden within. The empire understands that the true power isn't in selling the product, It's in controlling the very means of its production. This is the economic reality you now inhabit. You are a merchant, but your ambitions are stifled by this stranglehold. You hear whispers of the incredible prices coffee commands in Venice, in London, in places that have only tasted the dregs of the long trade routes. A desperate, dangerous idea begins to form in your mind. It's not enough to trade the beans. You must steal the future itself. You find yourself in the port of Mocha. The air is thick with the smell of salt, spices, and the ever-present, intoxicating aroma of coffee from the warehouses that line the docks. It's a smell of immense wealth, and it taunts you. You watch the Ottoman officials with their sharp eyes and officious manner, meticulously examining every shipment. You see the danger, but you also see the rhythm of it, the patterns of search, the moments of distraction. The plan is audacious. You won't try to smuggle out a sack of beans. That's suicide. You need only a handful, 7, to be exact, 7 perfect, unroasted, green coffee beans. That's all it would take to break an empire's monopoly. But how? Hiding them in your goods is too risky. Concealing them on your person is even riskier. The answer, according to the most persistent and beloved legend, was both brilliantly simple and utterly brazen. You do what the Indian pilgrim turned smuggler Baba Budin is said to have done. You hollow out a section of your pilgrim staff, or you sew a small, secret pouch into the waistband of your trousers, or, in the most famous version, you simply secure the 7 precious green beans against your stomach under a wide, girdle-like belt. The risk is breathtaking. A casual search, an informant's tip, a suspicious official, and it's all over. This is the mainstream historical fact. The Ottoman Empire maintained a strict monopoly on the coffee trade for centuries by prohibiting the export of fertile beans, a monopoly that was famously broken in the 17th century when, according to legend, an Indian Muslim pilgrim named Baba Budin smuggled 7 beans out of Mecca by strapping them to his abdomen. His successful smuggling run is credited with establishing the first coffee plantations in India, in the hills of Mysore, effectively ending Arabia's exclusive hold on coffee cultivation. It is a story that has the ring of truth, a single courageous act of defiance that changes the course of agricultural and economic history. And here is your quirky, fringe tidbit from the world of smuggling. Aside from the famous girdle method, other clandestine techniques were allegedly employed by less legendary, but equally desperate traders. One persistent tale speaks of beans being hidden inside hollowed-out loaves of bread, only for the smuggler to get desperately hungry during a delay and accidentally eat his entire contraband. Another method involved coating the beans in a thin layer of wax and mixing them in with a shipment of identical-looking animal feed pellets. The most bizarre and likely apocryphal story tells of a smuggler who taught his parrot to swallow the beans whole for safekeeping, with the plan to retrieve them later through natural means, once they were safely out of Ottoman waters. The practicality of this method is highly questionable, to say the least. Historians still argue whether the figure of Baba Budin was a single man or a composite folk hero, representing the collective efforts of many unknown smugglers who gradually leaked coffee seeds out of the Arabian Peninsula over time. The number 7 is also deeply symbolic in Islamic and other traditions, representing perfection and completion, which suggests the story may have been polished into a perfect, memorable parable. The exact date was it the 1610s, the 1650s? The lack of precise contemporaneous records allows the legend to grow, but the undeniable result is that coffee cultivation did indeed spread to India, and then to Ceylon and Java, shattering the Arabian monopoly. The journey out of the port is a lesson in controlled terror. Every glance from an official feels like an accusation. Every call from a guard seems to be for you. You move slowly, deliberately, your body feeling like a beacon announcing its own crime. The 7 beans pressed against your skin feel like they are burning with a guilty heat. But the inspections are routine, focused on cargo, not on the personal effects of a solitary pilgrim. You board the ship. The sails are raised. As the coastline of Arabia recedes into a hazy line on the horizon, a wave of euphoric relief washes over you. You've done it. You are a thief who has stolen not gold, but a seed, not a product, but potential. In your possession is the genetic blueprint for a global industry. The Ottoman Empire, for all its power, could not contain an idea whose time had come. The bean was out, and it was heading west, toward a continent that was about to be rocked by a caffeinated shockwave. It was utterly unprepared for the first stop, the shimmering, decadent, and deeply skeptical water-laden city of Venice. The sea voyage from the Ottoman lands is long, monotonous, and fraught with perils, storms, pirates, and the ever-present specter of scurvy. But you, and the 7 precious beans hidden away, survive. The ship glides through the Adriatic Sea, and a breathtaking sight emerges from the morning mist. Venice, La Serenissima. The city appears not built on water, but risen from it. A floating masterpiece of marble, gold, and reflected light. The air smells different here, no longer of desert dust or Ottoman spices, but of damp stone, salt water, and the peculiar, slightly rotten but not unpleasant scent of a city whose streets are canals. You disembark into a controlled chaos of gondolas, merchants shouting in Italian, and the clinking of coins from the Rialto market. This is the commercial gateway to Europe, a republic of merchants, where everything, from silk to souls, has a price, and you have brought something new to sell. The first sacks of roasted coffee beans arrive not with fanfare, but with curiosity. They are just another exotic oddity from the East, initially sold by apothecaries alongside spices, dyes, and medicinal herbs. The beans are ground and the brew is prepared in the rough, functional Ottoman style. The Venetians, accustomed to wine and weak beer, take their first sip. The reaction is not universal delight. It is, for many, visceral disgust. The beverage is dark, bitter, and completely alien. It looks like mud, tastes like medicine, and costs like a luxury. It is an acquired taste that almost no one is interested in acquiring. Critics are swift and brutal. They call it amaro, bitter. They call it the devil's drink. Some clergy, seeing its origin in the Muslim world and its powerful effect on the body, denounce it as a satanic potion, a trick by the Ottoman Empire to corrupt Christian souls. They argue that the Pope should ban it outright. For a time, the future of coffee in Europe hangs by a thread, trapped between commercial curiosity and deep-seated cultural and religious prejudice. This is the mainstream historical fact. Coffee was first introduced to Europe through the port of Venice in the early 17th century, where it was initially met with suspicion, hostility, and calls for it to be banned by the Catholic Church as the bitter invention of Satan or the wine of Islam. Its potent, unfamiliar flavor, and its association with the Ottoman Empire, a major military and religious rival, made it a deeply controversial commodity. Its path to acceptance was far from guaranteed, and here is your quirky tidbit from the Venetian lagoon. One of the earliest, most vocal critics was a local pamphleteer who penned a wildly popular and utterly nonsensical tract titled The Devil's Brew. In it, he claimed that coffee was not a bean at all, but a dried pellet excreted by a mythical, one-horned satanic goat that roamed the deserts of Arabia. He described its effects in hysterical detail. It would blacken the humors, overheat the blood, cause visions of a profane nature, and, most alarmingly, turn honest Venetian women into argumentative shrews. The pamphlet was nonsense, but it played perfectly into the fears of a populace wary of foreign influences. For a brief, absurd period, the debate in Venice's coffee shops was less about the drink's quality, and more about the digestive habits of a fictional demonic farm animal. Historians still argue whether the initial opposition to coffee was primarily theological or deeply xenophobic and economic. Was the clergy truly concerned about the state of their parishioners' souls, or were they reacting against a cultural import from a feared and hated Muslim empire? Furthermore, did the wine merchants and alehouse owners' guilds, seeing a direct threat to their livelihoods, secretly fund the propaganda campaign against this new, sobering competitor? The fear was likely a potent cocktail of all three: religious conservatism, cultural chauvinism, and plain old economic protectionism. The campaign against coffee was a fight for the very soul and economy of Europe's daily life. But Venice was, above all, a city of commerce, and where there is controversy, there is also opportunity. A few shrewd merchants sensed potential. They began to experiment. They started adding a spoonful of honey to the bitter brew. Then, a new wonder arriving from the Americas: sugar. The combination was a revelation. The intense bitterness of the coffee was perfectly balanced by the profound sweetness of sugar, creating a complex, energizing, and deeply pleasurable experience. This wasn't just medicine anymore. It was a dessert that woke you up. It was alchemy in a cup. The drink began to shed its demonic associations and gain a new one: sophistication. To drink coffee, now often sweetened, was to be worldly, to be connected to the exotic trade routes of the East, to be modern. The controversy, however, had reached a fever pitch. The calls for a papal ban grew louder. The matter was deemed so serious that it was said to have been placed before the most powerful man in the Catholic world, Pope Clement VIII. The fate of coffee in Europe would now be decided not by merchants or drinkers, but by the personal taste of a single, elderly pontiff. The fate of an entire continent's future caffeine intake now supposedly rests on the palate of one man. The story, as it's been passed down, is almost too perfect, too narratively neat. The controversy in Venice and other Italian city-states has grown so loud that it echoes through the marble halls of the Vatican itself. A delegation of conservative clergy, alarmed by the spread of this Muslim drink, petitions Pope Clement VIII to formally declare it the bitter invention of Satan and ban its consumption throughout Christendom. The Pope, a man known for his political savvy and, according to some accounts, his curiosity, doesn't immediately rule. He does something astonishingly practical. He requests to taste the beverage for himself before rendering a judgment. The stage is set for one of the most impactful taste tests in history. You are there, in the private papal apartments. The air is heavy with the scent of beeswax candles and old parchment. The Pope, an older man with a weary but intelligent face, watches as his servant prepares the strange black liquid. The process is alien here. Amidst the Christian iconography, the grinding of the beans, the heating of the water in the peculiar long-handled pot, the rising aroma, it's a ritual that feels entirely Eastern, entirely other. The servant, hands trembling slightly, pours the inky brew into a small cup and offers it to the vicar of Christ on earth. The conservative clergy in the room hold their breath, expecting him to recoil in horror at this devil's brew. Pope Clement VIII raises the cup to his lips. He pauses, inhaling the rich, unfamiliar aroma. He takes a sip. The legend says he paused, letting the complex, bitter flavor settle on his tongue, and then he smiled. According to the folktale that would become coffee's greatest marketing campaign, he declared, "Why? This Satan's drink is so delicious that it would be a pity to let the infidels have exclusive use of it. We shall cheat Satan by baptizing it and making it a truly Christian beverage." It was a masterstroke. With a joke and a sip, he not only approved the drink, but symbolically cleansed it of its non-Christian origins. He gave it a Christian baptism. This moment is the mainstream historical fact of this section. The widespread tale of Pope Clement VIII tasting and approving coffee around the year 1600, effectively giving it a Christian seal of approval, and paving the way for its acceptance across Europe. Whether the event happened exactly as told is less important than its function. It was the perfect story to dismantle religious opposition. And here is your quirky, fringe tidbit. A competing, far less flattering legend exists in some obscure corners of historical gossip. This version claims that the Pope's personal physician, a notoriously rigid and paranoid man, was vehemently opposed to the tasting. So opposed, in fact, that he allegedly tried to sabotage the demonstration by swapping the coffee beans with a look-alike made from burnt barley and bitter herbs, hoping to guarantee a foul taste and an immediate ban. According to this tale, the Pope drank the horrible concoction, grimaced, but being a diplomat to his core, simply declared it interesting and asked to try the real thing another time, thus inadvertently thwarting the plot. It is a story that highlights the deep divisions and absurd intrigues even something as simple as a new beverage could inspire. Historians still argue whether the famous baptism of coffee ever actually took place. There is no direct contemporaneous record of the event in the Vatican's extensive archives. The story first appeared in writing over a century later in a book by a Protestant historian, which makes some scholars suspect it might have been anti-papal propaganda, painting Clement VIII as a whimsical, even frivolous leader who made momentous decisions based on personal taste. Others argue that the lack of a written record means little. It was exactly the kind of anecdote that would spread orally, a perfect parable for coffee's cultural journey from Muslim world to Christian Europe. The debate hinges on whether we believe in the power of a singular, pivotal moment, or the slower, inevitable grind of economic and social forces. The practical effect, however, was undeniable, whether because of the Pope's actual blessing or simply because the story of his blessing spread like wildfire. The major religious obstacle to coffee in Europe evaporated. It was now officially not satanic. The green light was given. Venetian merchants, who had been cautiously watching the debate, now went all in. The first licensed coffee house in Europe opened in Venice in 1645, under the proud name Caffè alla Venezia Trionfante, the coffee of triumphant Venice. It was an immediate sensation among the city's elite. Drinking coffee was no longer just acceptable, it was chic. It was a way to signal one's sophistication, one's worldliness, one's connection to the latest trends from the East. Now sanctified by the West, the beans began to flow into Venice in ever-increasing quantities. The city became the distribution hub for all of Europe. From here, the phenomenon would travel north, over the Alps, to a different kind of city altogether, a city of damp fog, hard commerce, and revolutionary ideas. A city that wouldn't just drink coffee, it would use it to build a new kind of public life. The coffee was coming to London. The journey from the sun-drenched piazzas of Venice to the soot-choked, foggy streets of London is a descent into a different kind of chaos. You leave behind the romance of gondolas and arrive in a city of relentless commerce, of clattering coaches on cobblestones, and a Thames that smells more of sewage than salt water. The year is the mid-17th century, and London is a city rebuilding literally and figuratively from fire and plague. It is a city thirsty, not just for drink, but for connection, for news, for ideas. And into this anxious, energetic void, coffee arrives not as a sophisticated luxury, but as a revolutionary tool. The first coffee house opens in London in 1652, and it spreads like a virus of enlightenment. You push open the door of a typical establishment, perhaps Edward Lloyd's in Tower Street, and are immediately assaulted by a wall of sound and smell. The air is thick, a palpable fog of tobacco smoke and the rich, acrid scent of coffee, a smell one contemporary writer uncharitably compared to that of old shoes and mud. The room is packed, noisy, and overwhelmingly male. Benches are crammed with a dizzying mix of social classes. A wigged aristocrat argues about politics with a merchant in a wool coat. A ship's captain fresh off the Thames consults with an insurance agent. A scientist demonstrates a model of the solar system to a circle of rapt onlookers. A poet scribbles in a corner, fueled by the buzz and the bitter brew. The cost of entry? A penny for a cup of coffee. This is why they were called penny universities. For the price of a coin, a man could gain an education not from books, but from conversation, debate, and the cross-pollination of ideas from every walk of life. This is the mainstream historical fact. London's coffee houses in the 17th and 18th centuries functioned as vibrant, chaotic hubs of intellectual and commercial exchange, earning the nickname penny universities for the way they democratized access to information, debate, and professional networking for the price of a cup of coffee. The coffee house is the internet of its day. It is the news feed, the office, the social network, and the university lecture hall, all rolled into one smoky, cacophonous room. Each coffee house develops a specialty based on its clientele. Lloyd's becomes the center of shipping and marine insurance, eventually birthing the famous Lloyd's of London. Jonathan's Coffee House in Change Alley becomes the haunt of stock traders and investors. Morphing into the London Stock Exchange, writers and poets congregate at Will's in Covent Garden. The coffee house is the antithesis of the alehouse. In the tavern, men drank to forget, to blur the edges of their hard lives. In the coffee house, they drank to remember, to focus, to sharpen their wits and make deals. It sobered up a city, quite literally, and in doing so, helped sober up its thinking. And here is your quirky, fringe tidbit from the heart of this caffeinated chaos. The rules of some coffee houses were bizarrely specific and enforced with zeal. One establishment famously had a rule that if a customer uttered a profanity, he had to forfeit a coin to a swear jar that would then be used to buy coffee for the poor. Another had a bylaw that any argument that became too heated had to be settled by a game of chess, not fisticuffs. Advertisements for new coffee houses often listed their peculiar house rules as a point of pride. One advertised no whispers to prevent the spread of gossip and encourage open debate, while another promised no discourse of sacred things to avoid blasphemy and religious arguments. They were trying to curate a certain kind of civilization in a single, crowded room. Historians still argue whether the coffee house was truly the democratizing force it, as often made out to be. While it did bring different social classes together in one room, was it a true leveler? Or did the natural hierarchies of the age simply reconstitute themselves within its walls? Did the aristocrat truly debate as an equal with the merchant? Or was it a performative, patronizing exchange? Furthermore, this public sphere was almost exclusively male. Women were largely excluded from coffee houses, often satirized as coffee house widows, who languished at home while their husbands spent all hours and all their money arguing in these smoky dens. The coffee house may have fueled a revolution in public life, but it was a revolution largely for and by men. The energy is undeniable, though it's a tangible force in the room, a current of caffeine-fueled ambition and intellect. You drink your coffee strong, black, and probably sweetened with sugar, from the slave plantations of the West Indies, a dark irony underpinning this age of enlightenment, and you feel it. Your mind sharpens. The conversations around you, once a dull roar, resolve into clear, compelling arguments about navigation, philosophy, and the price of tea. You are alert, engaged, and connected. This is the new power of coffee. It's no longer just about staying awake for prayer or impressing a sultan. It's about building the modern world, one penny, one argument, one deal at a time. But as this new social engine revs its motor in London, we must now turn our attention back to the source, to the template. For London's penny universities, for all their innovation, were a pale imitation of a far older, more established, and infinitely more sophisticated institution. The world's first true coffee house, the one that set the standard for all others, didn't open in Europe at all. It had already been operating for nearly 2 centuries in the very heart of the Ottoman Empire. It was time to go back to Constantinople, to step through the doors of Kiva Han. The journey from the raucous, democratic clamor of a London penny university to the ordered, ancient sophistication of Constantinople is a journey back in time, to the source. You leave the cobblestone streets and wooden signs behind, crossing a cultural and temporal divide. The year is the late 15th century, over 150 years before the first coffee house would open in London. You are in the Ottoman capital, a city of minarets piercing the sky, of bustling bazaars, and of a social order as intricate and rigid as the patterns on an Iznik tile. And here, in the heart of the Grand Bazaar, amidst the scent of leather, spices, and incense, you find it, Kiva Han. It isn't a novelty or a controversial new trend. It is an establishment. It is, according to the best available historical records, the world's first officially licensed public coffee house. To call Kiva Han merely a place to get a drink is to call the Hagia Sophia merely a room. It is an institution, a social ecosystem. You step inside, and the noise of the bazaar softens, replaced by a low, resonant hum of conversation, the gentle gurgle of water pipes, and the soft clinking of porcelain cups. The air is not thick with tobacco smoke that would come later, but with the pure, unadulterated aroma of freshly roasted and brewed coffee. The space is designed for lingering. Low divans line the walls, piled with cushions. The light is dim, filtering through stained glass windows, creating a serene, almost sacred atmosphere. This is the mainstream historical fact, established in the 1470s in Constantinople, nearly 2 centuries before its European counterparts. Kiva Han is widely regarded by historians as the first genuine coffee house in the world, a licensed public space dedicated solely to the preparation, sale, and social consumption of coffee, setting the template for everything that would follow. The rituals here are precise, performed with a grace that makes the frantic service in a London house look barbaric. The kaveci, the coffee maker, is a master of his craft. He doesn't just pour, he performs the grinding, the heating of the water in the sazvi, the careful pouring to preserve the kimek. Each movement is economical and beautiful. He serves the coffee in delicate cups on small brass trays, often accompanied by a glass of cool water to cleanse the palate. The payment is not a penny tossed on a counter, but a more formal exchange. The social contract is different, too. While open to men of various stations, the hierarchy is more visible, more respected. A vizier might occupy the most comfortable corner, while a lesser merchant sits nearer the door. But both are participating in the same shared experience. And here is your quirky, fringe tidbit from the early days of Kiva Han. Legend has it that the original owner employed a unique method for settling disputes among his patrons. Instead of allowing arguments to escalate, he kept a large, ancient parrot in an ornate cage near the entrance. The parrot, supposedly trained over decades, would listen to the heated debates. When it sensed a disagreement reaching a fever pitch, it would squawk a specific phrase in Ottoman, Turkish that roughly translated to, "The truth lies in the cup, not in the mouth." The patrons, startled into silence by the avian interruption, would then be encouraged to take a sip of coffee and reflect. It was said the parrot's timing was impeccable, and its success rate at diffusing arguments was far higher than that of any human mediator. Whether true or not, the story highlights the coffee house's valued role as a space for civil discourse. Historians still argue whether Kiva Han was truly the absolute first, or simply the first one significant and licensed enough to enter the historical record. Some scholars point to vague references to earlier, informal gatherings in Yemen or Mecca, where coffee was consumed socially. The debate hinges on definitions. When does a gathering spot become a coffee house? Does it require a dedicated building, a license, a commercial transaction? Kiva Han possesses all these attributes clearly, cementing its prime place in history. What is not debated is its profound influence. It became the model, the gold standard. It proved that a public space, centered around coffee could be not just profitable, but culturally vital, a cornerstone of urban life. Sitting in Kiva Han, you feel the weight of its precedent. This is where it all began. The London coffee houses, for all their revolutionary energy, are the loud, unruly grandchildren of the serene, established ancestor here. Coffee is not a shocking new stimulant. It is a refined pleasure, a daily ritual, a thread woven into the fabric of the city. The conversations are different, too. They are not the frenetic deal-making of London's traders, but a slower, more philosophical exchange. Poetry is recited, stories are told, games of backgammon are played with silent intensity. News is discussed, but it is filtered through a lens of tradition and patience. It is a world unto itself, a haven of civilization and caffeine. But this civilized haven, this seemingly peaceful social hub, had a power that extended far beyond poetry and backgammon. The Ottoman authorities, ever watchful, understood this better than anyone. They saw that where people gathered to talk, ideas including dangerous ones could spread. And so, the world's first coffee house was also the first to be watched, the first to be seen as a potential threat. The social engine it created was powerful, and power always makes those in charge nervous. The serene atmosphere of Kiva Han, the gentle clinking of cups and the murmur of philosophical debate, was only one side of the coin. The Ottoman authorities, from the local magistrates all the way up to the Sultan's divan, watched the rapid proliferation of coffee houses across Constantinople and other major cities with a deep and growing unease. They saw what the merchants and poets did not: the immense social power of these gathering places, a space where men of different classes could meet, talk for hours, and consume a substance that sharpened their minds instead of dulling them was, to the ruling elite, not a haven of civilization but a petri dish for dissent. The coffee house, or kavhain, was becoming the central nervous system of the city, and the Sultan's spies were determined to be its brain. You are no longer a mere patron. You are a government official, a Cadi, perhaps, or one of the Sultan's countless anonymous agents, tasked with blending into the crowds and listening. Your assignment: monitor the kavhains. You move from one to another, sipping your coffee, your ears tuned not to the poetry or the backgammon strategies, but to the Sotovus conversations happening in the corners. You hear grumbling about tax increases. You hear cynical jokes about a corrupt official. You hear wild, speculative rumors about harem politics or military campaigns. This is the mainstream historical fact. The Ottoman authorities viewed coffee houses with intense suspicion, seeing them as hotbeds of political dissent and social unrest. They were places where the common man could criticize the state away from the mosque and the watchful eyes of the imams, leading to repeated, but ultimately unsuccessful attempts to ban or control them. The government's fear was that the coffee house was creating a new, uncontrollable public sphere. The kavhain was more than a cafe, it was a multifunctional social engine. It was a newsroom before newspapers existed, where information both true and false spread faster than any royal courier could carry it. It was a theater, where shadow puppet shows like Karaks and Hassabit offered veiled social and political satire, mocking the powerful to the delight of the common man. It was a gambling den, where men wagered on dice and board games. It was a literary salon, a business office, and a meeting hall for guilds. This very versatility made it impossible to control. You couldn't shut down every gathering place in the city. The government tried. Sultans like Murad IV would periodically issue draconian decrees, banning coffee, ordering the kavhains torn down, and even making consumption a capital offense. But the bans never held. The people's love for coffee and the social space it provided was too strong. The coffee houses would close for a few weeks, only to reopen in back alleys, in basements, in private homes, the original speakeasies. And here is your quirky, fringe tidbit from the height of the coffee house crackdowns. One of the most persistent legends tells of a particularly inventive coffee house owner who, during a ban, disguised his operation as a public bathhouse. He kept the baths lukewarm and largely unused, but the main attraction was in the steam room, where he would serve coffee in traditional cups. The logic was that if the Sultan's men raided the place, he could claim the dark liquid in the cups was just a special, invigorating herbal bath infusion for drinking, not coffee. The story goes that his business boomed during the Prohibition, as patrons loved the novelty of sipping their illicit brew surrounded by steam and tile, whispering their dissent wrapped in towels. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman government's primary fear was political sedition or a broader anxiety about social change. Was it specifically the criticism of the state that worried them, Or was it the coffee house's role in breaking down traditional social hierarchies? In the kavhain, a janissary could theoretically sit next to a clerk and complain about the price of bread. This casual mixing of classes and professions was unprecedented and, for an empire built on a rigid social order, deeply destabilizing. The debate continues. Were the bans a targeted effort to stop treason, or a desperate attempt to hold back the tide of modernity itself? The energy inside a kavhain is a low-voltage current of potential rebellion, and you can feel it as a government agent. You hear a man criticize a new edict, and others nod in agreement. You see a satirical shadow puppet show that mocks a well-known pasha, and the room erupts in knowing laughter. You realize you are not just monitoring individuals, you are monitoring a mood, and the mood is shifting. The coffee house is giving people a voice, a collective identity outside of their prescribed roles in society. It is creating a public, and a public, once created, inevitably starts to ask questions of its rulers. This fear was not unfounded. The same social engine that powered poetry and backgammon would, in time, fuel the discontent that would challenge the empire itself. But for now, the coffee house continued to thrive, a testament to the fact that the desire to gather, to talk, and to share a potent brew is a force more powerful than any decree. And it was from within this vibrant, defiant culture that one of the most powerful and unexpected players in the coffee story would emerge, not a poet or a dissident, but the Sultan's own elite military corps, the janissaries. Their relationship with coffee wasn't about conversation, it was about control, power, and money. To understand the next layer of the story, you must shift your perspective entirely. You are no longer a patron in a kavhain or a spy listening for dissent. You are a janissary, an elite soldier of the Ottoman Empire. You are part of an institution that is both the sword and the shield of the Sultan, a corps born from the Devirum system, taken from Christian families as a boy converted to Islam and raised to have no loyalty but to the state and your own brothers in arms. You are disciplined, feared, and powerful. And by the 16th and 17th centuries, your power extends far beyond the battlefield. It is woven into the very economic fabric of the empire, and one of the most lucrative threads you control is coffee. The janissaries' involvement in the coffee trade was not a side business. It was a central pillar of their economic and political might. Their guild, the Kaveci Asnafi, held a virtual monopoly over the roasting, grinding, and distribution of coffee within the empire. If you bought a cup of coffee in Constantinople, the money eventually found its way into the janissaries' coffers. This is the mainstream historical fact. The powerful Ottoman military corps, the janissaries, controlled the coffee guild, giving them immense economic power and a network of coffee houses that doubled as intelligence-gathering posts, making them a formidable political force within the empire. They weren't just soldiers, they were caffeine-fueled kingmakers. The logic was brutally efficient. The janissaries had the muscle to protect the valuable coffee shipments coming from Yemen. They had the discipline to manage the complex logistics of roasting and distribution, and they had the reach to place their members, or loyal civilians they controlled, in coffee houses across the city. This made every kavhain a potential listening post. The janissaries didn't just profit from the coffee trade. They used it to monitor the mood of the city, to gather intelligence on rivals, and to solidify their own power base. The coffee house was their grassroots network. A grumble about the Grand Vizier heard in a coffee house could be reported up the chain, allowing the janissaries to leverage the information for political gain. Their loyalty could be bought, and the money to buy it came from coffee. Your life as a janissary is intertwined with the bean. The smell of roasting coffee is the smell of your pension, your political influence, your off-duty life. Your corps' headquarters likely has its own massive roasting operation. The distinct sound of the coffee grinders is a constant soundtrack to your non-combat hours. You know that the wealth generated by this trade funds your advanced weapons, your provisions, and the generous benefits that make your position so enviable. You also know it makes your commanders some of the richest and most influential men in the empire, men who can depose a vizier or intimidate the sultan himself. The coffee trade is your financial engine, and you are its fiercely protective guardian. And here is your quirky, fringe tidbit from the Janissary Coffee Guild. It's said that the corps developed a complex, coded language based on the tools and processes of coffee preparation to discuss sensitive matters in public. A complaint about a superior officer might be couched in terms of a bad roast. A plot to demand higher pay from the sultan might be referred to as needing more sugar in the brew. The specific way a sazvi was placed on the fire, or the number of times the grounds were stirred, could be silent signals to other janissaries in a crowded coffee house. This system of coffee code allowed them to conspire in plain sight, turning the very symbol of their trade into a tool of secrecy. Historians still argue whether the janissaries' primary motivation was sheer profit or strategic political positioning. Was the coffee guild simply the most lucrative franchise available, which they seized with their typical efficiency? Or did they recognize the unique social power of the coffee house, its role as a communications hub, and deliberately take control of it to wield that power for themselves? The debate centers on intent. Were they opportunistic capitalists in uniform? Or were they early masters of information warfare who used a beverage distribution network to build an intelligence apparatus? The truth is likely a fusion of both, a brilliant, if ruthless, synthesis of economic and political strategy. This immense power, however, bred arrogance and made the janissaries a state within a state, a constant threat to the central authority of the sultans they were meant to serve. Their rebellions and demands became frequent. They knew their value, and they knew the sultan relied on their military might and their control of the city's most important commodity. The relationship was a tense, symbiotic dance. The sultan needed the janissaries to fight his wars and control his capital, but he also feared their ability to turn that control against him. The coffee trade was the financial fuel for this dangerous equilibrium. It was only a matter of time before this tension would snap. The janissaries' deep entanglement with coffee would ultimately contribute to their bloody downfall centuries later. But for now, in the 1600s, they are at the peak of their power, the undisputed caffeinated masters of Constantinople. Meanwhile, as the Ottonders perfected their military-commercial complex, a very different kind of battle was brewing in the coffee houses of Europe. A battle not for political power, but for the very soul of European social life. The battle for Europe's mind and morale was not fought on a battlefield, but in the crowded, noisy establishments of its rapidly growing cities. As you move from the Ottoman-controlled trade routes into the heart of 17th century Europe, you witness a cultural civil war. On one side are the ancient, deeply entrenched taverns and alehouses, the traditional centers of social life for centuries. On the other are the new, foreign, and frighteningly sober coffee houses. This is more than just competition. It's a clash of civilizations, a fight for the very character of daily life. Will Europe be drunk or awake? You step into a London alehouse. The air is thick with the sour, yeasty smell of spilled beer and unwashed bodies. The light is dim, the atmosphere heavy. Men, and it is almost exclusively men, slump over rough wooden tables, their speech slurred, their movements clumsy. They are here to forget the grinding poverty, the mind-numbing labor, the uncertainty of life. The alehouse is a place of escape, a warm, blurry refuge from a hard world. It is also, as the moralists of the day never tired of pointing out, a place of brawls, vice, and wasted time and money. The tavern is the past. Then you push open the door of a coffee house. The contrast is jarring. The air, while smoky, is sharp with the stimulating scent of roasting beans. The noise is not a dull roar, but a buzzing hive of articulate conversation. Men are erect, gesticulating, their eyes bright and focused. They are here to engage, to discuss the news, to make deals, to plan, to learn. They are consuming a beverage that sharpens the world rather than dulling it. The coffee houses, the future. This is the mainstream historical fact. The rise of coffee houses in 17th century Europe created a fierce culture war with traditional taverns and alehouses pitting the new ideals of sober productivity, intellectual exchange, and business efficiency against the old culture of alcohol-fueled escapism and leisure. The proponents of coffee were relentless and often hilarious in their propaganda. Physicians wrote pamphlets extolling coffee's health benefits, claiming it could cure everything from scurvy to gout to lethargy. Social reformers praised it as a sober and civil drink that would keep the working man clear-headed and productive. Businessmen loved the efficiency it brought to their transactions. The message was clear. Coffee made you a better, smarter, more successful person. Beer made you a sleepy, poor, and punch-drunk one. The tavern owners and the powerful brewing guilds fought back with their own, equally creative propaganda. They attacked coffee's foreign origins, its bitterness, and its strange effects on the body. And here is your quirky, fringe tidbit from the height of this culture war. The alehouse supporters circulated some truly bizarre claims about coffee's dangers. One widely circulated pamphlet insisted that coffee would dry out the brain and cause premature aging. Another claimed it was an aphrodisiac that would lead to moral decay, a direct counter to the coffee supporters who said it curbed lustful urges. The The most creative attack came from a brewers' guild in Germany, which published a broadsheet claiming that coffee was made from the burnt tears of the devil himself, and that each cup drunk would blacken the soul and make a man's shadow appear twisted and demonic. It was absurd, fear-mongering nonsense, but it played on the deep-seated fear of this new and unknown commodity. Historians still argue whether the triumph of coffee culture was driven by genuine societal betterment or by a new, more insidious form of social control. Was the push for sober, caffeinated productivity truly about improving the lives of workers, or was it about creating a more reliable, disciplined, and efficient labor force for the burgeoning capitalist system? Did the merchant class champion coffee because it made people smarter, or because it made them more pliable and productive workers? The debate asks a provocative question. Is a society fueled by caffeine inherently more free than one fueled by alcohol? Or are both just different methods of managing the masses? One offers escape through oblivion. The other offers a focused energy that can be harnessed for economic gain. The outcome of this great war was never really in doubt. The energy of the modern world required alertness, commerce, science, and industry needed clear heads. The age of reason could not be built on a foundation of beer. The coffee house, and the drug it served, was perfectly suited to the new era dawning. One by one, the taverns began to lose their cultural dominance. They didn't disappear, but they were relegated to the realm of pure leisure, while the serious business of building the modern world moved to the coffee house. It was a victory for sobriety, for intellect, and for a new kind of public life. And this new model, born in the Ottoman world, refined in Europe, was about to be tested again, transformed once more by the circumstances of war and the unexpected spoils of a failed siege. The stage was set for the next great mutation of the coffee house, this time in the city of Vienna. The narrative of coffee spread is often one of deliberate trade and gradual cultural adoption, but its rival in Vienna was born from chaos, panic, and the abandoned spoils of war. The year is 1683. The Ottoman Empire, at the peak of its power, has laid siege to Vienna. For 2 months, the city has been surrounded, its walls battered by cannon fire, its spirit tested by starvation and fear. You are not a merchant here. You are a citizen, a soldier, maybe a Polish cavalryman waiting for the signal to charge. The air is thick with the smell of gunpowder, fear, and the distinctly Ottoman scent of coffee that wafts from the enemy camp, a taunting aroma of a normalcy just beyond the walls. Then, the tide turns. The combined forces of the Holy League arrive, and in a decisive battle, they rout the Ottoman army. The siege is broken. The Turks flee in such disarray that they leave behind almost their entire camp. As the dust settles and the victory bells ring, the Viennese venture out to plunder the abandoned Ottoman encampment. They find tents, weapons, silks, gold, and sacks. Hundreds of sacks filled with strange, hard, greenish-brown beans. To the victorious but weary Viennese, this peculiar haul is a mystery. They assume it must be camel feed. They start to burn the sacks, disgusted by this reminder of their enemy. But then, a figure steps forward. His name is Georg Franz Kolschitsky. He is a Polish spy, a diplomat, a polyglot, and a man who had spent enough time in the Ottoman Empire to know exactly what these beans were. He recognizes the treasure amidst the trash. According to the most popular legend, he bravely intervenes. "Not camel feed," he cries. "My reward for my services. Give this to me." He is granted the entire, enormous cache of coffee beans as a reward for his crucial role as a messenger during the siege. This is the mainstream historical fact. Following the failed Ottoman siege of Vienna in 1683, the fleeing Turkish army left behind sacks of coffee beans. A man named Georg Franz Kolschitsky, familiar with Ottoman customs, recognized their value and is credited with using them to open the first coffee houses in Vienna, adapting the bitter Turkish coffee to local tastes by adding honey and milk. It's a perfect foundation myth for Viennese coffee culture, born from triumph in a clever individual. Kolschitsky, the story goes, now possesses the key to a fortune. He opens a coffee house, but he faces the same problem the Venetians did. The Viennese find the traditional Turkish preparation too strong and too bitter, so he innovates. He strains the grounds out, removing the sludge. He adds a generous amount of honey. Then, he does something revolutionary. He adds milk. The result is a smoother, sweeter, more palatable concoction. He calls it the Wiener Melange, the Viennese mix. It is an instant sensation. He serves it with a side of a crescent-shaped pastry, fashioned in the shape of the Ottoman crescent moon from the flags captured in the siege, a sweet, edible trophy of their victory. This, the legend says, is the origin of the croissant. It is a wonderfully symbolic story. The Viennese literally consumed the culture of their defeated enemy and transformed it into something uniquely their own. And here is your quirky, fringe tidbit. A competing, less heroic legend gives credit for the first Viennese coffeehouse to an Armenian spy named Johannes Diodato. The story goes that Diodato, also working for the Habsburgs, secured the first imperial license to brew and sell coffee in Vienna. His method for winning over skeptical customers? He allegedly hired beautiful women to sit in his windows, sipping coffee and sighing with exaggerated pleasure, creating the first ever coffee-based marketing campaign that relied on sex appeal to sell a bitter brew to a wary public. It was less about patriotic triumph and more about clever commerce, and the oldest trick in the book. Historians still argue whether the Kolschitsky story is more legend than fact. There is little contemporary evidence directly linking him to the first coffee house, and the Diodato claim has significant documentary support. The debate is a classic case of national myth-making versus messy historical record. Did Vienna need a dashing Polish hero to be the father of its coffee culture? Or was it the shrewd business acumen of an Armenian entrepreneur? The truth is probably that multiple people recognized the opportunity at the same time. But the Kolschitsky myth is simply too good and too symbolic to ever be dislodged from the popular imagination. Regardless of who was first, the Viennese coffee house quickly evolved into something distinct from its Ottoman ancestor or its British cousin. It wasn't the chaotic penny University of London, nor the serene, masculine world of the Kavhain. The Viennese coffee house became a third place, an extension of the home, a place of comfort and lingering. It was characterized by its elegance and its clientele. Marble-top tables, thonet chairs, newspapers from across Europe mounted on wooden racks. It was a place where all classes were welcome to sit for hours over a single cup of coffee, to read, to write, to think, to debate. The coffee house became the living room of the Viennese intellectual, the artist, the revolutionary. It was slower, more contemplative, and more democratic than any that had come before. The engine of social change, first built in Constantinople and supercharged in London, had found a new home in Vienna, where it was polished, refined, and upholstered for a new age. But while this social revolution was unfolding, a parallel, and far more ruthless, economic revolution was also underway. The question was no longer just how to drink coffee, but how to own it, how to grow it, and how to control the unimaginable wealth it was generating on a global scale. The social revolution of the coffee house, from Constantinople to London to Vienna, was a story of ideas, conversation, and culture, but underpinning it all, fueling its very possibility, was a far more brutal and relentless engine, global economics. For every cup of coffee sipped by a philosopher in a Viennese café, a long, brutal, and often bloody chain of production stretched across the world. The story of coffee is not just one of intellectual awakening. It is a foundational chapter in the history of global capitalism, colonialism, and human exploitation. To understand its true cost, you must now follow the bean back to its source, not to a mythical Ethiopian hillside, but to the vast, regimented plantations that began to scar the earth. The Ottoman monopoly was broken, the bean was free, and European powers, now fully addicted to both its consumption and its profit potential, raced to control its production. The Dutch were the first to act with ruthless efficiency. They smuggled a coffee plant out of the Ottoman sphere and established the first major European-owned coffee plantations in their colony of Java, Indonesia. In the late 17th century, the name Java would become synonymous with coffee itself. The model they perfected was simple and horrific: clear vast tracts of land, import enslaved or indentured labor, and farm coffee as a monoculture cash crop for export. Profit was the only god. The French followed suit in Martinique, the Spanish in Central America, the Portuguese in Brazil. Coffee became the lubricant for the colonial machine, a commodity that justified immense human suffering and ecological destruction for the pleasure and productivity of the distant West. You are no longer in a comfortable coffee house. You are on a plantation in Brazil in the 1800s. The air is thick and humid, heavy with the scent of coffee blossoms, a cloying, sweet smell that does nothing to mask the pervasive odor of human sweat and despair. You are an enslaved African. Your life is a cycle of brutal, back-breaking labor under a punishing sun. Your world is defined by the endless rows of coffee bushes, planting, weeding, harvesting the delicate cherries by hand. The wealth you generate is unimaginable, but you will never touch a coin of it. Your body is the coin. This is the mainstream historical fact: the explosion of coffee consumption in Europe And America in the 18th and 19th centuries was directly fueled by the colonial plantation system, which relied on enslaved labor in the Americas and exploitative colonial practices in Africa and Asia to produce coffee on an industrial scale for export. The caffeine that fueled the Age of Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution was harvested by enslaved hands. The scale is staggering. Brazil, in particular, became a coffee juggernaut. Its vast fazendus plantations required so much labor that it prolonged and intensified the Atlantic slave trade long after it was abolished in the Northern Hemisphere. The economy of entire nations was built on the back of this one crop. The demand in Europe and America seemed insatiable. Coffee was no longer a luxury, it was a necessity for the working class. The fuel that kept the factories running and the clerks scribbling. The price of this cheap, abundant fuel was paid in human lives on distant continents. The pleasant buzz a London dockworker got from his morning cup was a direct chemical transfer of misery from a Brazilian field. And here is your quirky, fringe tidbit from the economic frontier. The volatility of the coffee market led to some bizarre financial schemes in Brazil. During the coffee boom, planters sometimes used sacks of coffee beans as a de facto local currency to pay workers and settle debts, since actual coinage was scarce. There are tales of entire towns where price lists in shops were written not in currency, but in kilos of coffee. This led to absurd situations where a poor harvest could cause deflation. Your bag of beans was now worth more and a glut could cause inflation. Your bag of beans couldn't buy as much, turning the entire local economy into a chaotic caffeine-based roller coaster. Historians still argue whether the coffee plantation system was a driver or a consequence of the broader colonial project. Did European powers seek colonies to grow coffee, or did they simply use coffee as one of many tools to maximize profit from colonies acquired for other reasons? The debate centers on causality. Was coffee the engine, or was it just one of the most profitable cars on the colonial train? Furthermore, scholars still dissect the complex legacy. Did the infrastructure and global trade networks built by this exploitative system, however unjustly, ultimately create the interconnected modern world? It's a difficult, morally fraught question that has no easy answer. The bean had become a global commodity, one of the first. Its price fluctuated on exchanges in London and New York. Its production could make or break national economies. Its journey from a cherry on a bush to a cup in your hand was a web of transoceanic shipping, insurance, futures trading, and advertising. The romantic notion of the Ethiopian goatherd was now buried under an immense, impersonal, and often cruel economic system. The coffee house, that beacon of enlightened conversation, was the charming, polished storefront for a business with very dark roots in the colonial fields. This immense, economic engine, however, was built on a fragile foundation. A frost in Brazil could send shockwaves through the global economy. A blight in Java could bankrupt merchants. The world was now wired on caffeine, and its supply chain was tense, vulnerable, and morally compromised. And it was all made possible by that first coffee house, that first social spark. Which brings us to the end of our journey, to the final question. What is the true, enduring legacy of that first sip, that first gathering, that first coffee house in Constantinople so many centuries ago? The journey of the coffee bean is a mirror reflecting the best and worst of humanity. It is a story of spiritual awakening and brutal exploitation, of intellectual revolution and ruthless commerce, of quiet ritual and world-altering industry. From a lone goatherd's observation on an Ethiopian hillside to the sprawling, sun-baked plantations that reshaped the globe's economy, this humble cherry has been a silent witness to our entire modern age. It has been a sacrament, a secret, a smuggled treasure, a political pawn, and a social catalyst. And through it all, the heart of its power has never truly been the caffeine. It has been the space it creates, the coffee house, that third place, neither home nor work, where the magic of human connection happens. Think of it, the DNA of Kiva Han in Constantinople, that first licensed coffee house, is still alive today. You walk into any modern cafe, anywhere in the world, and you are participating in a tradition centuries old. The student studying in the corner, the freelancer tapping on a laptop, the friends catching up over a latte, they are the direct descendants of the scholars in Ottoman Haynes debating poetry, the traders in London's penny universities hatching deals, the revolutionaries in Viennese cafes plotting the future. The technology has changed. The beverages have become more elaborate, but the essential human need being met is identical. The place to gather, to think, to talk, to be alone together. The coffee house defeated the tavern not because it was more moral, but because it better served the needs of an accelerating world. It provided the clarity and focus required by the modern age. Its legacy is the very idea of a public sphere. It taught us how to be a public. Before newspapers, before radio, before the internet, it was the original social network. It was where public opinion was forged, where news was verified or distorted, where business was transacted, and where culture was made. It proved that when you give people a comfortable, neutral space and a stimulant that promotes conversation rather than conflict, incredible things can happen. Lloyd's of London, the London Stock Exchange, the Enlightenment itself. These were not born in palaces or parliaments alone. They were born on the marble tables and wooden benches of coffee houses, in the space between sips of a dark, bitter brew. And now, the energy of our story begins to soften, its sharp edges blurring into a gentle haze, much like the steam rising from a final, cooling cup. The frantic pace of history slows to the rhythm of a resting heartbeat. You have traveled so far, from ancient highlands to besieged cities, from monastic cells to mercantile exchanges. You have seen the world remade, one sip at a time. The arguments of scholars, the edicts of sultans, the desperate gambles of smugglers, they all fade now into a peaceful, distant hum, a background noise no more intrusive than the gentle whir of a fan. The light in the room is low, the world outside your window is quiet, and the weight of all that history feels not heavy, but like a soft blanket, a story told and now settling. That is the true, enduring legacy, not the commodity, but the community, not the caffeine, but the conversation. It is a legacy written not in books, but in the daily rituals of millions. It is in the morning routine that centers a mind for the day ahead, in the afternoon break that offers a moment of respite, in the late-night study session that pushes through fatigue. It is a simple, profound constant in a chaotic world, a warm cup in your hands, a space to breathe, and a thread that connects you to every thinker, dreamer, and trader who ever sought a moment of clarity and connection in the same simple way. The story of coffee is, ultimately, a story about us, our desire to awaken, to connect, to understand, and that is a story that will continue to be told, one cup at a time, for as long as we gather together. Now, let that history settle around you like a soft, well-worn quilt. Feel the vast, sweeping narrative of empires and economics, of sultans and spies, gently recede, leaving only the quiet, personal moment of now. The air in the room is still. The faint, imagined aroma of roasted beans has faded to a memory, a ghost of a scent that lingers only in the part of your mind that holds stories. Your breathing is slow, your body heavy and relaxed, sinking into the comfort of your bed. Each muscle, each finger, each toe is letting go, releasing the tension of the day, of the journey. The sound of my voice is just a soft murmur, a gentle wave washing over you, carrying away the last fragments of thought, the final echoes of centuries past. You are safe. You are still. You are here, in the deep, welcoming peace of the night. The world outside is sleeping, and you are drifting towards join it, cradled by the quiet hum of history. There is nothing more to do, nothing to figure out, nowhere else to be. Just this, just the gentle, silent dark, just the soft, steady rhythm of your own heart, a quiet pulse in the vast, peaceful silence. Let everything go, and just adrift.